Warning, viewer discretion is advised.
My name is Björk, and your television is just about to explode!
Being a fan of horror movies as a kid, I was introduced to a film that caught the world on fire for a bit. I remember seeing nothing but TV spots on how shocking and depraved this movie was. Before I knew it, every year they made one of these films. Every Halloween for 7 years straight, from 2004 to 2010, then resurrected in 2017, and then buried again in 2021.
Now, refusing to play the game is not an option.
But for 7 years, it was very successful, with most of them being very profitable despite their scathing reviews from critics. I remember guessing each year what they was going to do with the story and develop my own fan theories. A series once past the gore has a very intriguing tale of a tragic character. A series that made torture porn a viable genre, even though I think that it's not completely deserving of that title. I mean, comparing it to Hostel, there is kind of a difference. But I digress. Today, I'm talking about one of my favorite films ever made, Saw. Everyone has their own favorite horror series, and well, this one being mine. It, for most of my teenage years, was an unhealthy obsession. I was pulled in by the twists, by the horrifying traps, and most importantly, by the magnificent performance of Tobin Bell as John Kramer, aka Jigsaw. A character that's grown to be one of my favorites of all time, who's very interesting below the surface, with each film delving deeper into his backstory, making him a very interesting topic I've been wanting to cover. And I figured I'd do that by making separate videos describing each film. With doing that, I'll be able to express how each movie was made and show some love to a series I think is personally overlooked. I understand that some entries are not the best and can get confusing if you've missed one of them. And from the outside, I can see that these movies wear graphic violence like a badge of honor. So most moviegoers can care less about the sprawling soap opera story. Me, on the other hand, ate that shit up. I love these movies. I initially was going to make these videos back when Spiral released, but with no equipment at that time and plenty of other YouTubers covering them, I felt I didn't have anything to say. But this itch has become more aggressive, and I figured what best way to scratch it big time than to cover them all. But of course, a series is nothing without an original classic. Today, we'll be looking into the history and making of the first Saw film, and discussing its two creators, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, who both went on to be supreme juggernauts in the horror genre and other films. To most people, Saw and its many sequels are considered torture porn, which I can understand with the later installments, but I actually feel the extreme violence brings a sort of realism in Jigsaw's dark world, lit only by the putrid colors of yellow and green. It's graphic for sure, which has overshadowed the creative power behind these movies. So I feel responsible as a fan to somewhat cover not just this film, but the whole series, and on how it was a struggle for its creators to make. With that being said, the traps are set and the rules are written. Now, let's start the game. Saw is a 2004 psychological horror film directed by James Wan. If you somehow don't know the plot, it's about two men, Dr. Lawrence Gordon and Adam, who wake up in an industrial bathroom connected to a forgotten underground network tunnel after being kidnapped by a serial killer known as Jigsaw, who abducts people and places them in grotesque situations he calls games. The killer's game this time is for the doctor to kill Adam before his family is killed. It stars Carrie Elways, Danny Glover, Shawnee Smith, Leigh Whannell, and Tobin Bell. I was almost in my teens when I first watched this film. I was gifted the Saw Uncut Edition, which has 2 discs featuring the movie and a good amount of special features. The menu has secret clues you can click to find a new trailer or something like this.
What's your name? Very fucking confused. Game is to kill Adam. Hiya!
But most intriguingly, had the behind-the-scenes look of the film and its 2 young Australian creators, showing their journey and the odds they faced getting Saw made. Sure, down the line I get hyper-fixated on the ever-expanding lore, but the biggest reason I always loved Saw was from the creativity of James and Leigh. As a kid, I loved films, but seeing the magic behind Saw made me love filmmaking. I look up to them and low-key swore to be a filmmaker myself. And well, you see how that worked out. So it's such a pleasure to cover my role models and their adventure through the development of this modern classic. James and Leigh were both born early 1977. They met while attending film school in Melbourne and grew to be friends fast, as they had similar interests and a strong passion to make movies, with most of their time going into making shorts and developing film ideas. After college, the duo stayed in touch, still cooking up movie ideas while going through their own hardships. With many discussions over time, they came to a conclusion after gaining inspiration from seeing The Blair Witch Project and Pi, both pioneering films in the low-budget area. So with motivation to write something they wanted to make themselves, they wanted the script to be the star of the film.
James really badly wanted to direct. You know, I met him at film school and he used to make these little claymations. For myself, I was kind of interested in writing and directing and acting. And so eventually our problems sort of met in the middle. It was like, if we make our own film, I can play the lead and you can direct.
Leigh, Whannell, and I, you know, we've known each other for a while. We met back at film school in college, university in Australia, and you know, we shared very similar interests, and you know, we got along really well. And then we realized that we wanted to do the same thing, which is make a feature film. We wanted to write something that we can hopefully make ourselves.
Juan then pitched the idea of a movie taking place in a single room with 2 men trapped in it, challenging themselves with a creative micro-budget approach.
The reputation that Saw has is it was a great movie for a micro budget.
I love the inception of this film, that it came out of these simple confines of, we want to make a movie, we have no money, what can we afford? We can afford 2 guys in a room. And then they got creative and inventive and imaginative.
The original idea for the room was to be an elevator with the point of view coming from security cameras, so almost like Paranormal Activity-ish. But they eventually settled on the infamous bathroom instead. After talking with Juan about the story, Leigh said, "I'll never forget that day. I remember hanging up the phone, and without any sort of long pondering, I opened my diary that I had at the time and wrote the word Saw. It was one of those moments that made me aware that some things are just meant to be." It took Leigh up to 9 months to finish the first draft of the film, with it being fully written by 2001. James instantly loved it, but was hesitant on the finance for it.
When I finally gave him the script, it was the day before Christmas, and he called me and was like, "This is great, you know, it's much bigger than we can afford."
Initially, they both had $30,000 saved up for the project, but as the script developed more, they understood it would take a bit more funding. The script failed many times to be produced in their home country, as Australia at the time was known to be difficult to get films made and had a very small film community.
We wanted to make a film, but we quickly realised that in Australia, it's a very small film industry. It's very hard to get films made, and mostly films are funded by the government to this day. We felt like we were so outside of that. We didn't know the right people. We didn't know anybody in the film industry. It felt like a club to us. Maybe that wasn't the way it actually was, but that was our perception.
Their agent, Ken Greenblatt, read their script, encouraging them to go to California, with their other agent, Stacey Testro, finally convincing them to travel.
My agent and manager at the time, Stacey Testro, she read it and she was like, "What? Don't go and make this for $5,000 and screw it up. Like, let's go and try and find some real money. Let's try and find $1 million.
There was a couple of producers in Australia and they happened to call up and they happened to be looking for a low-budget horror genre film set in a self-contained space with a couple of people in it. So the script was optioned out of Australia.
Before taking the flight, Juan and Whannell wanted to show producers that they were also filmmakers. With Leigh providing $5,000 of his money, they opted to shoot a scene from the script that would eventually become the iconic reverse bear trap sequence, showcasing the gnarly jaw trap.
When our manager, Stacey, said, "Why don't we take it to America?" Which I always say was like, trying to climb up a sand dune and not being able to make it. And your friend saying, "Oh, it's cool, like, don't worry about it. We'll try Everest next week."
And then before we know it, we were asked to come to LA to meet up with these guys. And Leigh and I thought that, hey, look, we're really broke right now. We don't have any money. But we thought if we're going to go all the way to LA for a handshake, we might as well shoot a scene from the script to show these people that we're not just writers, but we're filmmakers as well.
With Leigh playing a character named David, who, like the Amanda character, is about to have a serious toothache when confronted by the story's creepy villain, Jigsaw, speaking through the mascot doll, known now as Billy. And yes, he wore a top hat in it, which makes the scene a bit more amusing. James built this version and the feature film version of Billy out of ping pongs and paper mache.
And he brought the puppet, he had the puppet made in Melbourne, Australia, and he flew over to LA with the puppet on the plane. And I remember him saying to me, I had to get him his own seat on the plane. So the stewardesses were a bit unnerved by that. So the puppet came first class.
The short became known as Saw .5. Most of the meetings on the script went so-so, with many companies being very interested in the short film, such as DreamWorks and Golden Circle, among others, offering enough money to make the picture, but lessening James and Leigh's creative roles. As you can imagine, they were less than enthusiastic about the offers, declining all. As fate would have it, the script would find its way to its biggest contributor, producer Greg Hoffman.
And another agent who's a friend of mine came out and had this sort of glazed look in his eye, looked and saw me sitting there and said, "Do you have 5 minutes?" And I said, "Yeah, what?" He goes, "I just want to show you something." It was the short that our director, James Wan, had shot of a sequence that appears in the movie. And about 2 or 3 minutes into it, my jaw hit the floor, and I said, "What are you doing with this? Don't do anything. Let me go do something." And I ran with the DVD and the script and took it to my partners.
And it was the kind of thing you watch, and then you liked it so much you wanted to watch it again.
It was just blew our minds, and then quickly that night we all read the script and tried to get in on this.
They then set up a meeting, which went fairly well, with the producers being instantly impressed with Juan and his artworks for his vision of Saw. They handed the young filmmakers a silver platter, giving them creative control and 25% of the net profit.
The thing we offered James and Leigh was that we were going to start in 8 weeks. And no one else can ever guarantee you that. There's always rewrites, there's casting. And we also guaranteed James as director, as someone that came out of a film school, and Leigh to be the actor. We basically gave them everything they wanted and start in 8 weeks.
Hoffman, Berg, and Cools put up a second mortgage on their Highland Avenue headquarters, known as Evolution Pictures at the time, rebranded themselves as Twisted Pictures. Accumulating a shooting budget of $700,000, considerably low than most movies, even then, challenging Whannell to shoot as much as he could when production began. Cary Elwes was one of the first actors who read the script and watched the short, being very impressed.
And I was just blown away. I'm thinking, this guy, how much time have these guys got on their hands that they're actually building real contraptions,
Cools was his manager at the time and casted him as the film's main character, Dr. Lawrence Gordon. The creators would score again after Danny Glover became very interested in the project after being won over by one short. He stated, "I saw 10 to 12 minutes of video of the first scene here, and I was really impressed with it." He then chose to play the role of Detective David Tapp. In a different interview, he also said, "I had never done a film like it before. Something about that detective character at that particular point attracted me to it."
For, a first-time director for a kid, it was the most amazing thing. I was like, oh my God, I get to work with Danny Glover and I get to work with Mr. Elwes, Mr. Princess Bride. And so these were actors that I really looked up to over the years. And so, the chance to work with them in my first movie was very exciting.
Shawnee Smith was first approached to play the character Amanda, as she was James's childhood crush. And I mean, who could blame him? Go watch the 1988 version of The Blob. She declined the role originally, as she was not really a fan of horror. She was drawn in by the short. Changing her mind, she decided to play the character. But the challenging role to be casted was its villain, Jigsaw. The duo wanted to make a baddie that would stand out.
The things that the Saw fans love about the series, it always comes back to this character who was dying of cancer, who was trying to inflict upon people the same death clock that was hovering over his head. He wanted them to be in a situation. People keep coming back to that in this theme of appreciating your life and of going through a test and coming out the other side a stronger person.
Leigh based the character's motives off of his experience working at a job he didn't like, developing migraines in the process. He then went to get an MRI scan done. While waiting there nervously, he thought, what if you were given the news that you had a tumor and you were going to die soon? How would you react to that? Cary Elwes called Jigsaw an iconic bad guy.
James and Leigh, having gone to Melbourne Film School, were real students of film, and they spent hours and hours studying the classic horror films that you mentioned that have all these incredible iconic bad guys, and they were determined to come up with their own iconic bad guy. And I think they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams with Jigsaw. I mean, he's a frightening character, and memorable is not the word for it. It's just, it lingers in your subconscious.
Mike Butters, who plays the razor wire victim, Paul, originally was supposed to be Jigsaw, but turned it down as he didn't think it was interesting enough. I'm sure he doesn't regret that now. With the role eventually going to Tobin Bell based on his voice.
Hello, Amanda. You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game.
Who eventually goes on to own the shit out of the character. Taking the role of Jigsaw, Tobin said, I did Saw because I thought it was a fascinating location for a film to be made. These guys locked in a room, to me, was fresh. I did not anticipate the ending when I read the script, so I was quite surprised as well. The film was worth doing for that moment alone. Before they knew it, James and Leigh was about to make their first feature film. It was now the time to see if they had what it takes.
He doesn't want us to cut through our chains. He wants us to cut through our feet.
With production underway, the crew were able to find one location where they could film all their scenes, including the trap sets and regular ones, with all the stages being close together. The lot ended up being what James envisioned, matching his description visually and aesthetically.
We shot the film in 35mm and in 1.85 to 1. Originally, I wanted to shoot it in 2.35, but everyone was telling me that you need more lights, you need more expensive lenses, you need to build more of the sets because it's a wider screen format. So I'm like, oh, okay. So from the very first day, it was all about compromise with this film.
No exterior shots were included as they couldn't afford them, making Juan's job even more challenging. A good scene would be when Tapp chases the character, Zepp, played by Michael Emerson. Both are in vehicles placed in a dark area and made to look as if they were driving. And if the pressure wasn't enough, James had to spend 2/3 of his time in Ottawa, Canada, working on his visa papers, which only left him 1 week of production.
I asked James if we could have a little time to rehearse, and he was kind of grateful that I said little time because we really had no prep time on this film. We really jumped right into it.
The production designers had hardly any time to build all the sets. James had hardly any time to plan all his shots, and the actors didn't have much time to rehearse any.
And when I wouldn't get the shots, I would just end up getting really depressed. And I would kind of like just stay there on set while everyone else has gone off to lunch. And go, oh man, what can I do to fix up my shots? So I would spend a big chunk of my lunchtime just literally not having lunch and just thinking about the shots.
Most of the time, James would be pacing with the script in one hand and a can of Coke in the other. He'd just be pacing, trying to figure out what to do, so I just kept well away.
With a small amount of time, the creators were still open with any ideas, allowing any cooperation from cast and crew. The bathroom was built from scratch and modified to the needs of the filmmakers, with all of the sequences being shot in chronological order.
The first moment that I have that was truly was when I just went on a quick tour of the set and they were in the middle of building the bathroom. And that was when I was like, whoa. The first day on the set was more nerves about what I was going to do with the performance. But I just remember being blown away by the fact that this room that had only ever existed in my imagination for the past 4 years was now there. You could touch it.
And when we built it, we basically built it out to the size of the room that we were building it in. Unlike a lot of movie sets where you take one wall off and now you got all this space, of course adding all the blood, which was a progressive task. And it came to the point where I was constantly going, okay, don't step in the blood, we gotta cover up the blood. And people were starting to step in it and footprints were going through.
6.5 days were spent shooting the bathroom with no time for rehearsals. Elway said most of the dialogue averaged 12 to 16 pages daily, which was a great challenge. As the shooting schedule was so tight, they could only do a couple takes per actor. The shackles worn by the two actors had a pin to get them in place. One of those shoot days, a different pin, bigger than the hole, locked Carey into his shackle.
I spent much of lunch in the bathroom while everyone else was eating. That was a good little bit of method for me.
Tobin spent most of his screen time on the bathroom floor throughout the shoot.
Because we knew what we wanted, and James had passed on the thing. And then the third day, it took about, 20 minutes? 10 minutes.
The filmmakers originally wanted a dummy, but Tobin insisted, which helps lead to one of the biggest twists. During the infamous sequence of Dr. Gordon cutting his foot off, Carey accidentally cut his leg.
I did actually cut my leg when I did that, even though they blunted the hacksaw. James was yelling at me, faster, faster! And I was like, well, that makes sense. I mean, I think I would definitely be doing it faster if I wanted to get this thing done. It's just a small cut, it's nothing. Here, you can see it there. There you go. There, an acting exercise.
Juan wanted the camera movements to reflect both characters' personalities, with Gordon having steady shots and Leigh's character, Adam, receiving handheld ones. These switch towards the end as Gordon starts to crumble and Adam becomes the reasonable one. The crew made the most out of the sets, using movie magic on the trap sequences, such as the drill trap and the razor wire room, with the drills having aluminum fake tips. In the following scene, Tap's partner, Steven Singh, is killed by a tripwire, triggering multiple shotguns on him while pursuing Jigsaw. But his original death from the storyboards instead activates 2 compacting slabs to crush him to death. Understanding they couldn't afford those effects, so the trap was then recycled for Saw 5 in a more grandiose way. The razor wire trap was made from rubber and plastic to get the terrifying effect of the Paul character crawling through the razors. They undercranked the camera, which in process speeds everything up. Another film trick that became a stylistic choice in the sequels down the line. The razor room also proved difficult to shoot as it was too short for giants like Danny Glover and D.P. Armstrong.
Danny Glover's like 6'5", so you know he's not going to be able to really stand up down. No, we got to shoot down here. And that was the day that David Armstrong, our director of photography camera operator, picks up the camera and puts it on his shoulder, turns around, bam, smacks his head right into one of the floorboards. And we had to send him to the hospital for a concussion, and our gaffer shot the rest of the scene.
With the reverse bear trap scenes, Shawnee had the flu and her temperature was up to 103 degrees.
Do you remember how sick you were the day we shot that?
The first day,
The first day she came, we were almost...
I was acting on...
Yeah, she was so sick that we, literally almost sent her home. We didn't know what to do.
Police scene or
the scene with
trap
me.
scene?
The trap.
The reverse bear trap scene, she was so ill. They were like almost basically pumping fluids in her.
I was ill enough to not mind that big
the real one.
The functional contraption on my head.
I remembered how much of a trooper Shawnee was, because I had her doing a lot of shaking and trembling and convulsing in that massively heavy bear trap, and then to find out later that she was actually not feeling well either just made my respect for her just jump even higher.
Without complaining, she did the scene with a newly constructed jaw trap. The one in the short film was much bigger and heavier than the one Shawnee wears. Hers was also made out of aluminum, and unlike the Saw 0.5 version, this one worked. The look of the trap reveals a lot of Amanda's eyes, which Shawnee is very expressive with selling the whole terrifying sequence. They ended up shooting all of Shawnee's scenes in one day.
It's like my Cinderella moment. Okay, I'll do it.
Oren also makes a brief cameo as the guy Amanda has to cut open to retrieve the key. The scenes definitely demanded a lot of James, who only got 3 to 4 hours sleep each night, as his and Leigh's goal was to get the film done on time. The sets were frantic, with Armstrong shooting most of the film over his shoulder. Glover finished his scenes in 2 days. His character, Tap, dead by the film's end, was resurrected as the main protagonist in the 2009 Saw the video game, which was also written by Leigh. But we'll get to that some other time. Though tense, the crew got along very well, especially Carrie, who had a great time on set and working with James and Leigh.
2 things. First of all, I really had a great time making it. It really was fun. I mean, even though we worked so fast in 18 days, we barely had time to sit down. It really was a joyous experience.
Carrot would bust out with his Marlon Brando impersonation every chance he gets. He does the most spot-on Michael Caine, I kid you not. And Leigh just does everyone. And, put those 2 together, and oh man, it was just hysterical.
They put cream cheese in my car so that when I went to opened the handle of my door, there was cream cheese in my hand. I never got that. It took me weeks to get that.
Before calling it quits, James had to complete the shooting for Singh's death and Amanda's hand scene. Both were stand-in by Leigh, as the actors have already fulfilled their contracts. $400 was spent on those reshoots. After much sacrifice and breakneck pacing, the film finished in 18 days. In post, the editor, Kevin Groydard, who would become one of the greatest influencers to the series, had to use his skills to cover much of the cheap budget, using promotional stills in the editing. One noticed they were missing portions of the film which weren't shot.
And because they were so quickly shot that once you cut it together, it just did not work. But fortunately for us, we had a video camera which was supposed to be the surveillance camera, and we shot a couple of scenes with the video camera, and boy, was I grateful for that one camera.
It took the composer, Charlie Clouser, 3 weeks to finish the soundtrack, birthing the amazing theme music, Hello Zep. With a few minor tweaks added, the film was on its way to create waves around the world.
As I was walking down the street coming here today, 2 guys in trucks, 2 separate trucks, stopped. Guys go, "Whoa, hey, love your movies, man, love your movies." You know, so it's always heartwarming that, you know, you do what you do on a 60-foot screen, and you end up in people's consciousness.
After filming was completed, Lionsgate picked up Saw's worldwide distribution rights at the Sundance Film Festival days before the film premiered on January 19th, 2004. It played to a crowded theater for 3 nights and was well received. It was the closing film at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it got even more praise. The positive reviews was the deciding factor to Lionsgate, who originally planned to release the film direct to video, decided to give it a theatrical release date on Halloween of that same year. After much anxiety over the project, James and Leigh were very relieved the film caught on in an instant. The film was originally rated NC-17, though after being re-edited, it was released with an R rating. Lionsgate held a blood drive, Give Till It Hurts, for the Red Cross and collected 4,249 pints of blood. This routine would continue with every installment released in the series. The film finally released in theaters on Halloween weekend of 2004, bringing in over $18 million on its opening weekend, placing number 3 at the box office, behind Ray and The Grudge. With a budget of $1.2 million, it finished its run with an impressive $103 million worldwide, becoming one of the most profitable films of all time. Its success was so massive that Lionsgate greenlit a sequel, Saw 2, on the weekend it opened, almost instantaneously. The reactions from the audience and critics were largely mixed at the time, with many claiming the film was well made and shocking, particularly the jaw-dropping twist at the end, but felt it was too violent and had many plot holes, with Seven ripoff being the forefront of some criticisms, which I can understand, but Saw feels unique in its own disgusting way. Whannell was asked in an interview if the David Fincher film was an inspiration for Saw, with him saying, "For me as a writer, definitely. I mean, Seven is just a very well-constructed film, and if you're writing a thriller, it can't hurt to study it. In terms of the story, though, James and I never really felt Seven was that close to our film. I guess if you stand back, you have 2 detectives chasing a psychopath who uses vile methods to teach people lessons, and those points echo Seven. What we always liked about Saw, though, was the fact that the story is told from the point of view of 2 of the psychopath's victims, instead of the police chasing after him, as you so often see. Both of the creators being very aware of the faults of Saw,
I love spotting mistakes in films, and boy, are there a lot in Saw.
Flaws or whatever. They just love the film. Some of them are so passionate about it that they question everything about it. They want to, why didn't they just shoot the chains?
With both dismissing the term torture porn as the genre of their film, clarifying it as a mystery thriller. The twist ending has ranked among the best in movie history, and it is mostly considered as the best twist in a horror film. I remember my jaw scraping the floor when I first witnessed it. The series later on relies mostly on recapturing that big end moment, with some sequels doing pretty good and others being fairly passable, but none has reached the pinnacle as the original. The reception, however, has increased positively with audiences over the years, with it being categorized as a horror classic. The critics, however, still sit on the fence with their many complaints. It ranked 10th on Blade Discussing's top 20 horror films of the decade, calling Saw perhaps the most influential horror film of the decade. It went on to win several awards and eventually getting a re-release in theaters in fall of 2014, a decade later. Though there were many upsides to Saw after it released, I'm afraid the news gets kind of bad afterwards, with Cary Elwes filing a lawsuit against Twisted Pictures and its producers as he only received a nominal salary with back-end revenues. He said he was promised 1% of the profit. It was eventually settled out of court due to disagreements, with Elwes abandoning any involvement in any future sequels until 2010 when he reprised his role again as Dr. Gordon in Saw 7. His character was written in with most of the sequels to no avail, which I'll cover in future vids. The young creators, however, decided to push on, with many story ideas for the next sequel.
But never thought of a sequel.
Well, I don't think if we were actually really thinking sequels, we'd have our lead character have terminal cancer either.
Well, I was just going to say before, somebody asked, if you had a time machine, I think that was you, Fred. I'm sure Tobin, if he had a time machine, would go straight back and be like, maybe he doesn't have cancer. Yeah. What if he's healthy? Then he would go back and kill Hitler,
just an appendicitis.
I remember Oren had to go home. We had a drink. He was so overwhelmed he had to go home.
In concluding this video, I'd love to say it was a great pleasure to finally cover the first Saw film. And I can't wait to go over the rest of the franchise and its main character, Jigsaw, which Tobin reprises in all the main films except the recent one, Spiral, which didn't really sit well with most fans. On continuing to play John Kramer in the Saw series, Bell said, "The most important things in these films are some of the concepts introduced in the first film, and there's little seeds that we tried to grow as time went on. For example, the treatment of the terminally ill in the medical community. Things that were growing in number 1 were successful and artfully expanded as the series progresses, which even proves more of why the original is so well beloved and continues to conquer the test of time. I loved its gloomy atmosphere and found its brutal message chilling. A madman loose in a community, abducting people that he thinks need to face their vices. A doctor cheating on his wife, and a photographer being a vile eye. I really like the characters of Dr. Gordon and Adam. Both played good by the actors, even though they slip into their natural accents.
I need to know the truth!
I told you!
I still really like the bathroom because it's a place I would never want to be in, let alone chained and locked in. Aside from the differences between Twisted Pictures and the creators, they all sacrificed a lot to make a film they knew would become a permanent mark in the horror genre. It went on to spawn 8 sequels, and an upcoming Saw 10 is confirmed in the works, and I'm so excited for it. With the editor, Kevin Groedert, who directed Saw 6, returning to direct this installment. I can't wait to cover the rest of the series, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. This is indeed the most personal video I've created so far. The game is still playing.
Live or die. Make your choice.
It's been wonderful so far. The script is really intense. I think you're going to be and Carrie and his